This episode is sponsored by Free Market Kids. Join the league of families who are transforming family time into unforgettable Bitcoin learning experiences. With our HODL Up Bitcoin mining board game, you're not just playing, you're building bridges, creating memories, and unlocking the brilliance of the future one block at a time.
And that's what really convinced me. We have got to escape this. So we decided to homeschool. One day during school, we got a knock on the door, and two men stood there in uniform, law enforcement. They presented us with a subpoena to appear in court to defend ourselves against charges of child neglect.
I understood the importance of what was taking place. And I also knew that our parents were stepping up to the plate for us and that they were going to battle for their kids and that they weren't going to let the state come in and tell them what they had to do with their children's education. That made an impression on me. And I know it made an impression on all of the other kids as well.
If you marry up homeschooling and Bitcoin, you truly are going to fix the world. That is going to happen. If you can make those two things grow together, you're going to have an impact on not just your family or your friends or acquaintances. That's going to affect the world.
Welcome, Bitcoin homeschoolers. Today we have an awesome conversation lined up. We have Jim Lord and Gabe Lord, and they have amazing backgrounds and so much overlap with the Bitcoin community and other things that we'll get into. I can't wait to get started. So, gentlemen, thank you both for joining us, and welcome to Bitcoin Homeschoolers.
Glad to be here, Scott, and tell me.
Thank you very much for having us.
So here's my initial thought, because there's so much overlap. So for the audience, we have two generations here, and they're both Bitcoiners, they're both veterans, and both believe in homeschooling. So there's a lot to get into, both on the schooling side and the Bitcoin side, but also from two generations' perspective. If you could each give a short background, and then we can kind of go from there. But let's just pretend that the audience hasn't met you yet. You guys can each just give us kind of an overview of your background and anything else you want to add along the way.
Well, does age get me to go first?
No doubt.
Okay. I joined the Navy at age 19 in 1959. I actually served in 4 different decades. I retired in 1983. I was 10 years an electronics technician, enlisted, 7 years as a warrant officer, and then 7 more years as a regular line officer. So I had 13 pay grades in the military. All of them involved with electronics in some way. Along the way, I somehow became an anti-submarine warfare expert. That was kind of unintentional, but that's the way the world treated me. My wife and I had 7 children while I was in the service. So that's kind of an interesting story all by itself. I retired and spent 15 years in the defense contracting industry. And it was there that I decided to retire. I found that to be a very unpleasant place to be. When I matched up my behavior and actions there with my ethics, that didn't turn out too well in my mind. So I finally retired, went to Utah. My wife and I wanted to be in a small town that had a 4-year university in the West. And we ended up in Cedar City, Utah. When I found that they had one of the best Shakespeare companies in the world, that sold the deal. We decided to move there without ever having been there. Not like a military transfer.
Wow.
We volunteered for that Shakespeare festival for 15 years and got so interested in it that I went back to school and got my second bachelor's degree in theatrical design. I was age 60 when I started and age 68 when I graduated. I then went to work for a theater company and ended up as a chairman of the board and directing manager. I ran a theater company for several years. Um, so that's how my background played out. I turned into a libertarian in the early 70s. I read a book called Restoring the American Dream by Robert Ringer, and it took me out of my present political place and took me to a new world. Over the years, I grew in that belief, and as a result of that, I learned a lot about inflation and spending and money. That was really a passion of mine. And then I found a book by some guy that I'd never heard of named Jeff Booth. I was interested in that book because it talks about inflation and deflation. I did not know anything about Bitcoin, but at the end of his book, he spends about a half a page talking about Bitcoin. I was so taken with the book and with Jeff that I started studying Bitcoin. I have earned my stripes in studying Bitcoin. I've read so many books. I got Gabe orange pilled, and from that we started wondering what can we do. That's how Operation Bitcoin came about, and that's where we are now. I'm writing articles about Bitcoin, serving on the board of Operation Bitcoin, trying to bring veterans into the Bitcoin world. So that's my backstory. Gabe, your shot.
Amen. Man, I don't know if I can compare to that. I haven't been around as long, but I'll give it a shot. So, yeah, I was born into a military family. Pop was in the Navy, born in San Diego, California. And we're going to get into this, I'm sure, a little bit later. But for a good chunk of my schooling, I was homeschooled, and we'll get into those details. And it made an impact on me in the way that I view the world, as it does, I'm sure, for many people, because it's different. The approach is different. And I did not join the military at 19. I waited until I was already an old man. When I was 27, I joined. This was a couple of years after 9/11, and I wanted to be a part of something bigger. It felt like something historical was getting ready to take place, and we were just getting ready to go into Iraq at the time. And so I was weighing out my options in life, and I decided to do something that felt like it was going to be impactful and meaningful. And so I did. So I joined the Army in 2003, and so I got the opportunity to head over there and go to Iraq and do all those Army things in Iraq that you see in the movies and hear about. Came back and recruited actually for a little while, and that was my experience that brought me to that point of realizing that, okay, it's time to consider other things to do in life. And so left the Army after 9 years and moved into talent management, coaching, training and development, leadership development, things like that, but always stayed involved in various veteran support programs. So my passion has been to support service members on their way out of the military and find ways to prepare them for civilian life, to support their transition into civilian careers. And so I've been involved in that since I got out in 2012 in some way or another. And yeah, a little while back, I was talking to my dad, and he kept on telling me about Bitcoin. And I'd heard about it here and there, of course. It's in the news, it's on the internet, and I was like, okay, somebody's going to get rich and a bunch of other people are going to get ripped off. And I'm probably, whatever. I wasn't into investing or gambling or any of that crazy stuff. And so just kind of left it alone. But Pop kept on telling me about it and kept on telling me about it, sending me articles, sending me YouTube videos. I'm like, all right, okay, all right, okay, Pop. I mean, I'm not just saying this because he's on the call with us, but
Sure,
I'm going to let you know that he's one of the smartest people that I know. And so I was like, okay, there's probably something to this, because I trust him. So I started watching the videos, started reading the books, started doing the research, and then after he basically held me down and poured Bitcoin in my ear, the light came on. And I said, "Oh, okay, there's something to this." And I called him up and I was like, "Hey, there's something to this." And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, there is." I was like, "This is actually money, isn't it?" And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, it actually is." And I was like, "Okay." So I did a little bit more research and then said, "Hey," called him back and I said, "This is more than just about money. This is about freedom, isn't it?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah, that's right. You finally got it." And so thanks, Pop, for being patient with me. But it finally happened, and I got it. Saw the light, and was sufficiently orange pilled. And then, yeah, it's just like you said, Dad. We started to say, okay, well, what can we do with this? There's something. There's a mission here. There's a purpose here. There's something that needs to be done with this. And so, with my background of supporting veterans in transition, of course, both of our statuses as veterans, and he didn't say this, but my dad has helped quite a few other veterans with processing their VA paperwork and taking care of them and getting them set up. But it just made perfect sense, and so we said, okay, what we need to do is we need to educate other veterans. We need to create opportunities for other veterans. We need to get them set up and get them taken care of. And then, yeah, Operation Bitcoin came to be, and we started that up last year, and that's been our focus since then.
Well, I appreciate the call to service for both of you, like to contribute to something that's bigger than yourself. And there are so many overlaps with the veterans and the Bitcoin, but today, I mean, the call to service that Tali and I feel is also for the kids and the next generation. And the overlap that we see consistently with homeschooling principles, like parenting principles about freedom, what we want to teach our kids, not just about money, but first principle ideas. Huge overlap. Huge overlap, and I think they're directly connected because when Bitcoiners lower their time preference, they're more likely to get married and have kids. Right? There's a definite correlation between the different groups, and there are so many things that you guys have described to go into. Maybe we could just take a step back, Jim. Let's go back to when you're in the military, and something must have happened to motivate you to say, we're going to try homeschooling because. And I don't remember the exact year. I know you told me before. I don't remember. But this was in the pioneer days of homeschooling, at least in the kind of current century. If you go back like a couple hundred years ago, like that was kind of like, I guess no one would have batted an eye. But in our culture today, the homeschooling thing has really caught on in the last maybe 20 years, I think. So you were way ahead of the curve on homeschooling, just like you're ahead of the curve on the Bitcoin. What was going through your mind? What led you to consider homeschooling?
The thing that tipped me over was the fact that one of my sons, we have 6 sons and 2 daughters, one of my sons was flunking English in school at the same time that he was publishing articles in a children's magazine. That was such a disconnect. And that's what really convinced me. We have got to escape this. We got to get out of this. My last tour duty was in Charleston, South Carolina. At that time, South Carolina was the number 50th ranking school system in the country. So I was having to send my kids with this mentality, this thing is broken, and I'm in the worst of the worst. So we decided to homeschool. We did it in an interesting way. We gathered 4 families together with 13 children and started our own school. Cleared out a family room, took all the furniture out, put in folding tables and chairs, and actually set up a formal classroom. For curriculum material, we found in the days before the internet. This was in 1983, by the way. I guess that makes it 40 years ago. So, Scott, you're right. I was on the bleeding edge of the movement. We operated that little school. We had students in there from high school down to 4 years old. My youngest daughter learned to read in that school. Before she turned 5, she could read the scriptures flawlessly. As you know, those little minds are very, very strong, much stronger than what we might believe.
Mm-hmm.
We operated the school for a couple of months. And one day during school, we got a knock on the door, and 2 men stood there in uniform, law enforcement. They presented us with a subpoena to appear in court to defend ourselves against charges of child neglect, educational child neglect. Well, I had a very favorable kind of circumstance in my life to respond to that. My final tour in the Navy was a tour of where I was in command of an organization. So I was a commanding officer, and that makes you kind of frisky. So we talked it amongst ourselves, the 4 sets of parents, and prayed about it and decided to take it on to see if we can turn that situation around. So we managed to get an appointment with the county superintendent of schools. We went in to see him. We made a really smart decision. We did that. We all dressed up in dress uniforms with medals, not with ribbons. And made sure, I mean, we actually discussed it. We want to make sure those medals get to clank while we're in this guy's office. We want to send him every message that we possibly can. So we talked to this fellow, and he said, I don't have any choice. It's the law. So I'm going to have to deny your request. And he said, okay, here's what's going to happen. And we had planned this out in advance also. When we walk out of here, the first thing we're going to do is call 60 Minutes. And then we're going to call all 3 of the other major networks, plus PBS. And you are going to start receiving telephone calls because you are the 50th worst school system in the country. And we are all combat veterans standing in front of you. And we're going to talk to the press dressed just like this. That's what we've decided to do. And an amazing thing happened. He picked up the phone, made a phone call, and talked for a moment, and then handed me the receiver. And this guy said, I'm Mr. So-and-so. I'm general counsel for the South Carolina School Department, Education Department. I'm going to send you a form. It's 2 pages long. Fill out that form and send us $15 and we will declare you to be an eleemosynary, which I had never heard before, an eleemosynary institution. You'll be identified as a religious school, and we will never contact you again. I learned a lot of things from that. The government doesn't love you. I learned that the reason they come down so hard on us is because we were military. Every state, and I know I see the look on Scott's face, every state that has military dependents in the public school system gets a generous stipend from the federal government. That's called, I forget what it's called. Anyway, it's to compensate them for the fact that military often don't buy houses. Their tax structure is different. Many of them live on base. So it affects the income from the property tax in the area. So they don't like it when military students leave. Our 13 students represented a very sizable chunk of funding for them. There are school districts in the country that receive tens of millions of dollars per year because they are located near major military bases. What they don't like is military leaving their system because it really hurts them financially. So they will tell you that we have your students' best interest in heart. We've sent people with guns to your door because we're trying to take care of your children. Well, that's just nonsense. That is just nonsense. They don't care about our children at all. They care about the money our children can produce for them. So that's what happened to us in getting started with homeschooling. The other thing that I learned was government typically is cowards. If you stand up to them and really show them that you've dug your heels in, many, many times you can. I didn't mention this earlier. They were going to, the two officers that came to our door told us the charge of educational child neglect brings a fine of $10 a day, every day, for every student, for each parent. And it's retroactive to the day you started. It was going to cost us literally tens of thousands of dollars in fines already before we ever got to court. Oh, and by the way, there's also 10 days in jail for each student, for each parent, retroactive. We were literally facing years in prison and tens of thousands of dollars of fines, because we loved our children.
That's an amazing testimony. I am just blown away right now. Gabe, may we give your dad a break there to catch his breath. How old were you when this was happening?
Well, I guess I must have been about 7 or 8 at the time, and yeah, and I remember. I mean, it was a blast. I mean, really. I mean, these kids were my best friends. I mean, it wasn't like sitting in a classroom. Obviously, I mean, we did special things that were a lot of fun. I don't want to get too much into it, but when you're not in that government regulated and dictated curriculum format, it gives you a lot of flexibility to do things that are going to, I mean, as we all know, I mean, there are many ways that children learn, and it's not just from receiving information and regurgitating information. But anyway, yeah, to answer your question, I was pretty young. I was about 7 or 8 years old when this was all taken off.
I want to ask a question.
Podcast, sweetie, go ahead.
So when you said the trigger for you was when one of your sons was simultaneously getting published in a children's magazine as a writer and flunking English. Can you explain that situation a little bit more? How can he be flunking English? Or he?
That was the grades he was getting.
Why?
And the reason was that he was totally bored out of his skull. Mm-hmm. He was so advanced compared to most of the other classmates that they couldn't come close to teaching him anything. Mm-hmm. So it was that standard thing that takes place in the public school system. Total mismatch between even age groups. We had a 4-year-old that was reading better than a 3rd grader. If she had gone into 1st grade in the public school system, they would have been teaching her stuff that she had a long time ago in her little mind. So
yeah, I mean, you trace the incentives back.
I'm sorry, Scott.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you're done there. It seems to me, as you're describing that, it all has to do with the incentives. I mean, we recently just talked with Seb Bunny with his book, The Hidden Cost of Money, and people say it a lot of different ways, but it comes back to incentives. If the government has incentives because of the money, because like you described earlier, they're going to get more funds if the kids are there. They're not interested in the well-being of the child. You, as a parent, you are interested in the well-being of your child. You could extend this to a lot of things, like the whole medical community, where you've got bureaucrats and insurance and government and other agencies in between the patient and the doctor. And what are the incentives? Pharmaceutical companies as well. Like, you just trace the incentives back, and even if you present the facts like, hey, this student is able to excel, we should be encouraging this student to do more, and they have a gift and a passion, let's let them pursue that to the greatest extent. But that doesn't fit somebody else's incentives. And so you can try to make the argument to them, my kid is gifted and he needs to excel and he's doing these things. It doesn't matter. And it's just amazing to see. And this goes back to what your point too is, once you start to do some reading on your own and you start to see the framework of why this is happening, like the Jeff Booth framework that you mentioned. That was also a pivotal book for me as well. And yeah, I am really upset. I mean, it might be 40 years ago that you said this happened. I'm upset for you, even though this is long past, and clearly you did a great job parenting, because I mean we're talking here with you guys today with Gabe. Yeah, but it's the clarity now to see what bad money can do to incentives, because I really doubt that most people start out saying, man, I want to be a teacher so I can hold kids back. You know, I don't think that's their intent.
Right.
At least most of them. But once they're in there, now they have to worry about their own job, and they have to worry about whatever pressures they're getting into. And you look at, I mean, states have to fight for funds for the roads, and universities fight for their funds, and it's all this clown world game. And it's just, I mean, as Bitcoiners, we go down that rabbit hole all the time. But these are our kids. Like, we're talking about our kids, and to hold them back or hurt them in some ways emotionally or academically or in any other way, that is disturbing to me. And all the more reason why we are passionate about trying to reach people about taking self-custody of their education, the separation of education and state. And let's get these incentives aligned with each other. So I think it's great that you stood up. Not everybody would have been able to stand up like you did. Think about how many other people didn't have the means that you had to be able to stand up to do that. So I'm grateful you did that.
One other thing I left out, Scott, I was on the verge of retirement from the service. I had already decided, I had my papers in. Even if things had gone badly for me, there was nothing the military could really do to me at that point. Mm-hmm. These were misdemeanors that I was charged with. They just simply would have cut me loose, and I would have gone on with my life. So I was not very much at risk employment-wise or career-wise by taking that action. Now, there would have been people really upset with me if I'd gotten arrested. I can guarantee you that. But
yeah.
I think we knew that we had a winning hand, to tell you the truth.
But bad things happen when good people don't stand up, and the pressures are intense. So, I mean, you got to, I mean, that's standing up to that. That is a lesson that I'm glad we're going to be able to share with others. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Oh, I was going to, sorry, go ahead.
There are a few things that'll get your attention more than men with guns on your front porch.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's
yeah. In the early days when we were just starting to educate our kids, we were advised by HSDLA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, that if anybody came to your door, you just don't even answer any of their questions. You say nothing and you turn around and you go call them. Because that was still the environment that we were in. We had to be that on guard. I'm not sure that we are, any of us in any of the states, in that situation anymore. But even then, it was always like we didn't let our kids play in the front yard because we didn't want our neighbors going, why are your kids at home during the school days? They should be playing in the backyard, that kind of thing. But I wanted to find out from you in those early days. I mean, you guys were trailblazers. What were the reactions from your own family and friends when they found out that this is what you decided to do with your kids?
I got no negative reaction from them at all. I have two brothers and one sister, all younger than me. As the eldest in the family, I held that position and was often looked up to by them. So no, I didn't take that I knew of. I didn't take any negative response at all from them.
Wow. I'm really surprised.
In addition to which, we're LDS, and LDS is a very, very family-oriented religion. All four of us in our little homeschool were LDS. So, they were our closest friends. And so that was a response I got from them. Oh, gee, that's cool. Let's do it. Because they knew what was going on with the public school system as well. We totally did not have to convince them that there was a problem there. They already knew, as many, many people who have children already know. There's all kinds of people out there that, just like you said, Scott, they just don't have the resources to do something like that.
Well, they also don't have the
That's
support.
one of
That's
why
a big deal.
we did it as. That's why we did it as four families. That allowed us. Two of our guys were on active duty on submarines, so they went on deployment. We had one of our teachers leave for 6 months to go on deployment, and we were able to withstand that kind of problem.
But I also just the other
we ran our school.
Yeah, that's so the thing on it is you also had the resource of the support, and what Tolly was describing when we started homeschooling. Even our own families didn't understand what we were doing. They do now.
Yeah.
They've seen the kids turn out and they think they get it. But initially it was very different. I had gone to a public school, and I know my family was like, what are you doing? I mean, they didn't say it in a bad way. They said that we love you, we'll be there to support you. And if you look at a lot of the things that we talk about, where the high tide preference of our society has led to double income types of families, you have families that are far away from, like, you don't have like the grandparents right next door to the kids, right next door to their cousins, and you don't have those kind of support groups as much as, say, 50 years ago. And if you look at just what's happened with the family in our culture, now people are more on islands. And to be able to have a support group, it really is. This is why Bitcoiners want to come together. This is why veterans want to come together. This is why homeschoolers go to conventions to be around other homeschoolers. Why there are libertarian conventions. So that's huge. I mean, I think I don't know how to emphasize that enough. That if a parent or a want-to-be parent is listening to this podcast, and you're saying, well, we don't have kids yet, or they're kind of young, there are many things that you can work on now to help make you a better parent and a better homeschooler later. And one of those is, if you are not already part of a support group, then reach out and find one. Because that, at some point, either someone's going to need to lean on you or you're going to need to lean on them, but that support group cannot be understated. In my opinion, that you guys had a real blessing there, that you had that. I'd like to turn it a little bit.
Just want to add something. So, you mentioned that you were in the 50th ranked state for education, and you were able to at least go to the superintendent and kind of plead your case. In our case, I came from the number one county education-wise in the entire country, Fairfax County, Virginia. And my family was so upset that I decided to homeschool. And I have a niece and two nephews that are going through the Fairfax County public schools. They are still in it, so I'm not seeing the finished product, but I still firmly believe 20-some years later that I did the right thing, despite the fact that I could have sent them to a school district like that. So, well, I want to also like to address what you guys said in the beginning when you were giving us your personal stories about how Gabe was orange pilled by his dad. And I think a lot of families, if you look at our society across the board, once the kid leaves your roof, you no longer have influence over the child. And the relationship, a lot of them anyway, tends to be just holiday based. Like, oh, I gotta go spend a week with my family. I roll for a week over the holidays and then that's it. And then I don't want to, I want to live my own independent life. And I think it says a lot to learn that you had such a good relationship with Gabe that you were able to tell him something that is so revolutionary. Because how many families can have that kind of open conversation? I think that speaks to the fact that you guys had a close relationship by spending time together when you were homeschooling in their formative years.
Well, there's actually a connection here I'd like to get to on that. And Gabe, I hope you're okay sharing this, but one of the things you and I have talked about is exactly what Tali's talking about, is that parent-child relationship. So here's the connection. I'm listening to what your dad described. I know some of your stories, and I'm thinking the relationship that you guys have together right now, working on Operation Bitcoin together, right? It's very clear, even though, like Jim, we're still getting to know each other. Gabe, maybe you could comment on what you learned from this experiences that your dad was just describing, and if you're okay with it, maybe describe like the podcast that you and your daughter are working on together, or some other example, because I think what it's passed on to another generation, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked, because these are the exact things that are going through my mind right now, are these connections with it. Tali, you had asked earlier how old I was when this stuff was going down with all the legal excitement that was taking place back then, and I can tell you it's very clear in my mind the feeling that was experienced during that ordeal. I remember all of the pairs of parents sitting down, meeting about this in the other room, while the kids are all over there doing kids things. I can remember the feeling of how important this was and how serious this was, that this was taking place. And it's not, they didn't sit us down and say, okay, guys, here's what's going on. We've got this legal thing that's, it wasn't like that. But some of the older kids, they kind of had a feeling of what was taking place. And, they're going to be like, all right, look, the cops are after us. We're all going to jail. And so, but I knew the relevance of it, and I understood the importance of what was taking place. And I also knew that our parents were stepping up to the plate for us, and that they were going to bat, and that they were going to battle for their kids, and that they weren't going to let the state come in and tell them what they had to do with their children's education. That made an impression on me, and I know it made an impression on all of the other kids as well. That kind of thing is a shaping experience for someone when they know that their parents believe in something enough to go fight for it on their behalf. It makes an impression, and it did with me as well. And so that's something that told me a lot at a very young age about who my father is as a person and as a man. And so that's something that really, it shaped my perspective of him as a person of integrity, and as a person who is going to fight for something when they believe in it. And so anyway, I say all that to say that it was a foundational moment in our relationship from then until now, and it's something that it set a pattern for me to observe growing up, and seeing him take on additional challenges, throughout the years, additional projects. It was always something that he believes in, and so that's something that I feel has always been an influence and an aspect and a factor in our relationship. And so it kind of also put these seeds inside of me that there's something wrong with the system, and there are problems that most people are going to just kind of let go and just kind of go along with and deal with. And some of these problems do need people that are going to stand up to them, especially when it comes to protecting the people that we love. And so this is one of those things that, as I said, it's been a recurring theme throughout life, but it's one of those things that when Bitcoin became present, and when I became aware of it, and when through my father studying, pop, when you brought it into my awareness, into my field of view, and brought me to understanding it, it just made perfect sense. And I said, of course, this is something, of course, this is something that, that my dad is going to be passionate about. Of course, this is something that he's going to dive into and study and to find ways to be a part of this as a mission. And so it just made perfect sense for me to jump in, because I mean, obviously, I trust you, Dad, and like I said, you're a smart guy, and it just made perfect sense. And I got to tell you, I mean, the opportunity for us to engage in this mission together, especially given the gravity of the situation that our world is facing right now, this opportunity for us to engage in this together is just, I mean, it's beyond measure to me. It's something that's amazing. But the reality is this is an important mission. And I believe it's the most important mission. I believe it's the most important topic that's facing our world right now, that many of us do. That many of us do see things in that exact way. And the relevance and the overlap between Bitcoin and homeschool, I mean, it can't be overstated. There's a complete and total alignment between these things, and I know that that's why we're finding, like you touched on, Scott, why we're finding these communities of people that have these shared ideals, that have these shared visions and common benevolent incentives, that we're finding so many people that are jumping on this mission, that are moving this forward, that realize the importance of it, that it's more than just money. It truly is about freedom in every aspect of our lives, whether it comes to educating our kids, or having strong families, or serving military veterans, or just freedom in general for everybody. This is something that belongs to all of us, and it's necessary for all of us to be a part of. But yeah, I can tell you, when I look back on it, and I'm not even sure if I've really reflected on it, to the level that's happening right now during this conversation. But looking back on it, it really does make perfect sense that everything that has happened before would culminate in this experience taking place right now, and for us to engage in this Operation Bitcoin mission, serving veterans and ultimately influencing freedom for people around the world. So it makes perfect sense, and I can see, yeah. I appreciate this conversation, because I think I've just had a couple of realizations.
So it's a foundational moment, and now you find yourself not only as a veteran, but also a dad. Can you, and I really liked your story about how you and your daughter decided to do a podcast together. Because when our kids come back, the reason I think it's so profound is when our kids came back, they were when I call it protected. They were in a homeschooling environment. They got done, and with the high school, and Tali said, "You guys need to go see the world." She signed them up for a couple different things. This is around COVID, so this actually got a little complex. And they came back, and they're like, "We don't want any part of that." What they saw was some behaviors that they just could not wrap their heads around, in terms of drugs and sex, and just a very different lifestyle. And they did not, and their peers. And so now our girls are in college, and their friends don't understand if they make a comment like, "I was talking to my mom," or "I was talking to my dad," or "I told him this," and they're like, "You told your dad about whatever?" And they're like, that they, like, it's a generation that is separate. And one of the things that I'm coming to understand, I didn't understand this when we started homeschooling, but it's very clear now. the school it wants conformity, right? And there's a lot of things that go into that, but if you look at it from a Marxist standpoint, separating parents from their kids is important. Separating people from the church is important. And the reason is because now you can have more control. You can have control over the message. You can have control over people's thoughts. You can have control over people when you do that. And it's completely foreign for a lot of these the peers of our kids who are not homeschooled. They just can't get around this idea. Like, you talk to your parents,
Right.
let alone share with them details of your relationships. And then I'm like, hey, here's this guy who's busy mining some fiat and starting up a nonprofit with his dad to help vets, and it's not like you got a lot of extra time, and yet you and your daughter are going to do this thing together. And in my head, that's so significant. That's so significant. And I was really hoping that you could kind of share it, because I think this is when your dad was talking about the environment that you were in and how it shaped you. You're passing those things down to your kids. You're sending a message that you love them and the things that you do. You're going to protect them, etc. And it pays off with these types of relationships. So yeah, I'd just love to hear, what are you guys doing? What inspired you guys to do it? Am I totally crazy in this perspective of that as an outlier?
Well, yeah, if you're crazy, then it's the right kind of crazy, Scott. Because just kind of echoing what you said, there definitely is. They've made it very clear that separating families is part of their agenda. I mean, they do not want people to have strong family relationships. They do not want parents to be involved in the lives of children, because when those strong relationships exist, then the kids don't have to rely on the state as much. And so that's, they want to be the parent of everyone. And and you can't, I think that the data is there and the evidence exists that that's what they want. And so having strong relationships, obviously, it does matter. Now, yeah, I mean, with my daughter, it's, I got to tell you, first of all, she's a unique person. She's a very, she's intelligent. She's really brilliant. She's always been way ahead of the power curve. She's one of these kids that I've had to really try to keep up with in life. At the same time, we've been fortunate in having a bond. I've always been very, very intentional about being present in her life. And I always wanted her to know that I'm there all the time, got you, without being too overbearing or helicopter parentish. And it's worked out relatively well. So I'm grateful for that. At the same time, I mean, she is one of these kids that, she'll shoot me a text during the day or just give me a call or just see how things are going. We'll chat about whatever and talk. And fortunately, she's an athlete, and so we get a lot of time practicing her sport, and she's a softball player, and so she'll grab me up and say, let's go out and let's throw. And so we'll throw or we'll bat, and it's an awesome thing. It's an awesome thing. We cut up, we joke around, we have a good time. So I don't know where she gets all that coolness from, but I don't know. It's probably, well, I have to give her mom some credit. She's a pretty fantastic person, but she's a good kid. And so last year she came up with an idea. Now she's very strong in her faith. And she came to us when it was time, when she wanted to get baptized, and she told us, listen, I've made a decision and this is what I want to do. And we said, great, let's talk about it. We talked about it, and she was ready, and she made that decision. It wasn't something that we said, hey, look, you need to think about doing this. You need to make this happen. We really gave her the room to explore that on her own. And she did, and she came to that conclusion. And she was ready, and so that happened. And she's she is on fire with her faith, and so she wanted to share some of her experience with as many people as possible. And she came to me and she asked me if I would like to start a podcast with her. And part of the idea behind the podcast was we spend a lot of time in the car driving around, going to softball tournaments, doing things like that. And during these drives, we talk a lot. And so we just, talk about whatever. And sometimes the conversations get a little philosophical, or she'll ask me a question about something that she read in the Bible. And we'll just, we go there. We have some really cool conversations. And you know how it goes. I mean, anytime you have some of these types of conversations with your kids, you know that you're helping them to kind of grow and to learn, but at the same time, and I mean, it's a cyclical event. You're both growing and you're both learning, and so we love these conversations. And she asked me, what could we? I wonder if there's some way that we could share some of the things that we talk about with other people, because I think that it could help some people. And we're having the conversations. And then when they're over, and they're really special. They're really special moments. And I wonder how we could share those moments with other people that might not be able to have these conversations with anybody. And so she asked me if we could start a podcast, and I said, sure, let's do this thing. I mean, you know how it is. Yeah, when your kid is excited about something and they get passionate and they get enthusiastic about something, I tend to be the person that says, yeah, let's do this thing. I'm going to jump into the encouragement mode. And then if we need to adjust later, we'll adjust later. But usually, if she comes to me and she's got an exciting idea, like, yeah, let's do this thing. Oh, you want to try skydiving? Yeah, that's cool. Let's jump off the roof first and make sure we can survive. But I said, yeah, let's do it. And so we researched how to start a podcast, and found the easiest way that we can't break something on the internet, and we got some headphones and some microphones, and we started figuring out what we wanted to do. And yeah, we launched it, and decided to call it, because we based it on these moments that we were experiencing, and we were brainstorming, what are we going to call it, and decided to call it More Moments. And so we've I tell you, we have some interesting conversations. We usually go in there with a plan, but we don't always stick to the plan. We just chat, and it's just the two of us just talking.
Some of the best, right? I mean, you don't have to go to Disney or some other place, your international travel, to have that moment. Like that's just precious. And I'm actually thinking right now, Gabe, if for the listener, if the listener of this podcast is someone, again, who's young kids, they're a Bitcoiner, they're thinking about homeschooling, or maybe they're contemplating having a family, and they're thinking about how to approach this homeschooling thing. There are people out there who just financially cannot afford to have both parents stay at home, or have one parent stay at home. They need both parents to work, and everybody's circumstance is unique. However, it doesn't mean that as a parent you don't have opportunities. If you are traveling to sporting events, if you can share in those events, if you can do a project together and say, hey, on the weekends, let's record a podcast together. Like, I mean, even with the young kids, I mean, you could probably come up with some silly YouTube type of idea too. It doesn't have to be a really serious type of thing. And it's even if you only get 0 views, like, it doesn't matter, because you had time with your kid, and your kid had time with you. And then when they get older, like, you can't go back and replace that time.
No.
You can't. So there are lessons there. Even if you are not able to homeschool, as a parent, think about the ideas that are out there that you can be creative to set up these times where you can be together. They don't need a big party. They don't have to do super travel. They don't have to have I don't even know what it would be, whatever. But if you're, they don't have to go to a certain concert. They don't have to go to a certain game. You can still do things. There's a lot of things that you can do that create up those opportunities. And I think that's just
absolutely
pretty. It's a pretty cool example. And if you're all right with it, we'll put a link in there. If you don't want to put a link, we won't. But
yeah, that's cool. And I tell you what, man, and I want to echo something that you just said. one of the, this may seem like common sense to a lot of people, but I'm going to tell you one of the most impactful things that I found that set the foundation for our relationship was reading to her as a baby. I mean, from the very beginning, before they can even understand words, to be able to sit there and hold your child and read to them. And it doesn't matter what you're reading. You can read, the newspaper. You can read a kid's book, Dr. Seuss. It doesn't matter. You can read them some, the Bitcoin Standard, and it doesn't matter if they get it or not. But the fact is, it's the act. It is the experience that is forming that bond, and it is the experience of pouring into that person, and they can feel it. And that's something that, I mean, every single night that it was possible, that's something that took place. And so from the moment that she can remember, that's something that we have always done is taken part in an experience where her father was investing in her, was pouring into her, was sharing something with her. And it doesn't mean I don't make all kinds of stupid mistakes, because obviously I do. But that's one of the things that I would recommend to anybody who's thinking about having kids. Make time for that. If that's all the time that you have, is if all you can do is make 5 minutes to sit down and hold your kid and read to them and share in that moment, then take it. Take it. That's that opportunity that you're going to have. And you're right, especially in today's world, there are so many families where they just can't afford to not be there. They can't afford to be there all the time. I get it. But the moments that you do have, make something of them. Make them count. Don't spend them sitting there staring at the TV or staring at your phone. Okay? And playing games on your phone with your kid isn't necessarily what I would consider quality time. Break out a paper book, sit there and read it with them, and it will reshape their lives. I'm going to brag on my little sister for a minute. I know, Pop, you mentioned her a couple of times. She's probably the smartest one out of all of us, okay? That makes me the second smartest because she's the last one after me.
But you're the most humble, though.
Exactly. I mean, I'm like the humblest person you'll ever meet. But no, but she's brilliant. And I know that a part of that was the foundation of sitting down, teaching her how to read. And this is something my parents did with her, and it made a huge impact on her life. And she's brilliant. She's got brilliant children. She's an amazing person. I'm going to make sure to send her a link to this, so she already knows how I feel about her. But yeah, you guys definitely saved the best for last, and the pretty good one for the second to last. And but anyway, yeah, that's a piece of advice that I would throw out to anybody, because as parents, you're going to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. I make them all the time. I always will, and I've accepted that a long time ago. But there are some things that you can get right, and if you can form a bond, if you can build a relationship, that's the most important part, because all the other things, you can work through that. You can figure things out. You can overcome problems if you've got the relationship. So that's the one thing that I would recommend that you do, and spending that time. And if you can homeschool. And if you just can't, if it's just not realistic, find time where that child is the only thing in the world to you, and make sure that they know it. And then it's going to show when they get older.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
With a related comment, we had the benefit of 13 students in our little home school. That developed that relationship that Gabe is talking about right there between parent and child. But there was another dynamic in our school, and that was that older children teaching the younger ones. That helps both. It takes the burden off of whoever is teaching. You don't get that in the public school system. We had countless incidents when, who understands this right now? Who understands it completely? And one little kid would raise his hand. Okay, you take so-and-so, go in the kitchen. You're the teacher now.
Yeah.
We did that constantly. So that dynamic between siblings and the socialization that takes place during that kind of an encounter is priceless.
Oh, I bet.
So that's another aspect of homeschooling, is the fact that you can give those kids a chance to do something like that. You see how it enhances both of them, teacher and student.
Absolutely,
Great.
to both. I agree with that, because it's not just a socialization. I agree with that. Supporting the parents, I agree with that. But I also think when you go to a public school and you're in a sit down and receive, that's like the message to the kids. You will sit down and receive.
Right.
It is, and Gabe, with your involvement with training, I think you'd appreciate this. When you have to teach a subject, it forces you to learn it on a different level. Like, it's a completely different level. And there have been plenty of times when I thought I understood something, and then when I tried to explain it to someone, realized I didn't really fully understand it. Like when I wrote I wrote all my notes down when I was doing the huddle up game, and I'm like, this will be easy. I'll just put them down there, and then I would get into it, and I realized, wait a minute, I thought I understood this. I mean, I listened to the experts on the podcast, I read the books and whatever, and I'm like, I didn't. And when you ask a kid to go and explain to another kid, this is how you throw a football, this is how you do math, this is how you write a program, I don't know, whatever it is, this is how you cook, that's another one. I think you do something inside the child that's teaching that you can't get when they're in the receive mode of, here's the material, and I'm going to throw it at you in some format, and then I'm going to see if you can regurgitate it back to me. That is not the same saying, Gabe, go teach your sister, she's having trouble spelling, or she's having trouble with math, or she can't figure out how to use the washing machine, or whatever it is, like a life lesson in there. When you teach, like that child is filled up with a different type of confidence, not just the material, but a different type of confidence and how to impact others. And I see Gabe kind of smirking a little bit there, so I don't know.
Yeah, you're dead on. Yeah, of course, man. If you really want to learn something, then go start teaching it to somebody. You're going to have to figure it out quick, especially when they start asking you questions. You know as well as any. I mean, kids, they're going to ask the questions, and that's great. And that's part of that whole cyclical nature of learning, right there as well. Is that everybody grows. Everybody grows. Parents that are teaching their kids, whether it's homeschool or whether it's just teaching them something, just a normal everyday task, you're going to have a deeper understanding of that. It's one of the cool things about Bitcoin that I'm learning also, is the more you talk to people about it, the deeper of an understanding that you have, especially training people about it,
Yes.
veterans in particular, because, man, they're going to ask tough questions. You want to talk about some people that are going to start sharpshooting at you. If something doesn't add up, it's going to be them. They're almost as challenging as kids can be when they start throwing the hard questions at you. But that's why we do it, right?
Yeah.
And it matters, and it helps us to identify our areas of opportunity for learning any particular subject in greater detail.
There are a couple other areas I was hoping to hit on with you guys. If we could, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. We have not yet had a podcast where we have focused on schooling in the military. When I was in the military, I got out after 5 years, and I was still single. So I don't, and even if my situation had been different, that was a while ago. So because we haven't talked about it, if one or both of you could help us understand, like, what's going on in the military right now, and if a military person is listening to this, do they have the option for homeschooling? Where is that? It's an area that I haven't explored yet, and I'm curious what you guys know about it.
I can put a comment in there. Kelly, you mentioned the Homeschool Defense Association, whatever, I forget what their formal title is, but they actually have a section in there on homeschooling for military. So if you dig around on their website, it won't come up on the homepage. You have to kind of dig for it. But if you look, and the reason they support military, they say there are many, many veterans, active duty military, who homeschool because it gives the children a sense of continuity through the multiple changes of address that you have and the deployments and all of those family disruptions that take place when you're active duty. I had never considered that. Of course, I didn't know about those folks when we started, but their support, even at that level, and it's recognized that military is a special class and a special place for Bitcoin to be taught. That's one of the things that Gabe and I, the decision that drove us was we both veterans, both combat veterans. You see what I'm saying, and that's why it made so much sense to us to. And Scott, I will add here. When Gabe and I first decided to do this, and Gabe will tell you that this is true, one of the first things I said was, the second place we got to go is the homeschoolers. We decided on veterans, and the next place we got to go is homeschoolers.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we could combine forces on this.
Veterans, homeschooling veterans are, that's a gold mine.
Well, just be careful. We might be reaching out to try to partner with you on getting to some of these conferences, and I don't know if it makes sense going from. I see it going two directions, Jim. I think one direction would be working together from Operation Bitcoin, where we're targeting military, active duty, and veterans to teach them about the money that'll lead to load time preference, and then you've got the homeschooling would fit right in there. The other angle is our current efforts from a free market kids perspective to get to homeschoolers and that community, because their values are so aligned with the Bitcoiners. How can we extend that into the veteran thing? And I'm not sure exactly which way it goes, but we will definitely be reaching out. We can brainstorm on how to make those connections. But do either of you guys know what the current state of like homeschooling, what the environment is like in the military today? This is an area, like I said, I haven't gone deep on it, but this conversation has inspired me to understand more.
Yeah, I do not know, but I can guarantee you that the folks at the Defense League, they do know.
Okay.
I mean, they've got a whole section on it that deals with that subject.
Got it.
So that might give an avenue directly into the right, group of veterans to go to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can tell you from my conversations with people that are still in and people that have recently separated from the military. I've been out for over 10 years now, but the people that I'm connected to that are still in there, there's more and more of a conversation of homeschooling within the active duty community. A part of it, Pop, is just like you were saying, it comes down to continuity of education, just due to reassignment and relocations. But another part of it is that I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, but the DoD has its own schools that are on military installations in many cases where the kids of the service members attend, and so it's not a lot of them don't go to school out in the communities surrounding the installation. They go to school right there on base, and so we all know, many of us know that the standards that are set in schools that are, just Department of Education schools in general, they're declining. They're pretty bad. Public school system obviously isn't doing very well, which is why we're all here or why anybody is listening. But if you want to see an amplified version of the negative direction of these schools, then go look at a military installation. The schools there are even worse, in my experience. I'm sure that there are a couple that aren't as bad as others, but you're just going to see an amplification of the problems that are taking place, specifically from an academic standpoint, and many, many more conversations about homeschooling and seeking out opportunities for that. Options for that from active duty service members have crossed my radar over the past few years, because they're tired of it. And this is just one of those additional factors that I hear from people that are separating from the military as to what contributed to them making that decision. First of all, when you've got this continuous involvement in this never-ending war, for no reason at all, for no true strategic advantage that any of us can see. You've got this endless war. You've got service members being subjected to experimental vaccinations and other social experimentation and all this other stuff. I'm not going to go too far into it, but you see people leaving the military at a higher rate than you have before, and the recruiting game is suffering as well. They just can't make mission. They can't find enough people. And this is one of those contributing factors as to why they're leaving. Okay, it's one thing if you're going to mistreat a service member. It's one thing if their experience in the military is lacking, to put it kindly. But if they also can't find suitable education for their children, and if homeschool is not an option for them, and their only option is to send them to a DoD, to a Department of Defense / Department of Education school, then they're going to make those decisions based on that information there. It's one thing, for a civilian to be out there and say, you know what, the school systems here are terrible. I'm taking my kid out. We're going to homeschool. But when you've got a service member who is giving they're giving of their time, they're giving of their energy, many of them, they're giving limbs and they're giving their lives. Then at the same time, on top of that, to have their kids be subjected to substandard education, it's going to drive their decision making in an entirely different way. And so then they're coming out of the military not only disgusted and nihilistic about their own experience, but then about the experiences that their children had. I think that we're going to see an increase in specifically in veterans that are interested in homeschooling their kids based on those experiences that they're having while they're in the military.
Yeah, that's where we can expand. Maybe phase 2 or 3 of the Orange Brigade can reach out to can make that connection. Mm-hmm. I know we've gone long. I have one more question. I'm going to phrase it differently for each of you. I wanted to get your perspective on it. The last thing that I wanted to ask today was, how did you teach your kids about money? So obviously, Jim, we want to hear about how you can, all the way up to and including how you got them into Bitcoin. And then Gabe, what are you doing to teach money? Jim, maybe you go first. How did you teach money to your kids?
Very out of the box. Imagine Bitcoin without Bitcoin, but all the other values are there. That's the way I taught. I taught them about inflation. I taught them about fiat. And I was doing that in the 70s, mind you. I was orange pilled by people who have yet to admit that Bitcoin is even real. But I read people like Richard Maybury, for example. If you've never heard of him, he publishes books specifically for the homeschooling community. They are best-selling books within the homeschoolers. Richard Maybury, easy to find on the internet. He has written 11 books designed specifically for children on economics and politics. Anyway, I won't go on.
Is he the one that wrote the Penny Candy series? Uncle Eric?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
Yep, Uncle Eric.
Yeah, Uncle Eric's system. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks to an instructor, a teacher at the Naval Postgraduate School of all places. I started an economics class the first time I went to college, and I'd left it about 3 days after it began. It was just nonsense to me. Totally unsatisfying. I dropped out of the course. And I thought that I hated economics. I said, if this is what it's all about, then I hate it. But then years later, I went to the Naval Postgraduate School, and I took an economics class because it was required for my business degree. Well, I ended up taking 4 graduate classes in economics, not just the single one. And that teacher was magnificent. That's all I can say. He was just one of those people that you run into from time to time that just speaks from the top of Mount Olympus. I mean, he was wonderful. And that really started settling my mind.
So
plus a number of other books specifically about money and inflation.
How did you translate that to the kids? I mean, it's one thing I know that when I learned something, if I try to take a podcast to the kids, good luck. Like they're not there. If I say I got a great book, they're gonna say, okay, mom and dad have recommended like 3 books a day forever. So how did you so you have an insight. You're like, it's Austrian economics or it's whatever person that you followed. How did you get that to Gabe and his siblings? How did you try to get that across?
I don't even remember. It's been too long ago.
Gabe, do you remember?
But I can tell you how I would do it now. Imagine a poker game in which the players, in order to get chips, they bring in loaves of bread. You get 100 loaves of bread, and you bring in 100 loaves of bread, and you'll get 100 chips. You play poker for the evening, you finish up, you trade in your chips for the bread. The last chip gets the last loaf of bread. A new player comes in the next week. His name is Sam. He arrives with his 100 loaves of bread. When he gets low on chips, he reaches in his bag and pulls out more chips. He brings 50 more chips into the game, but he does not put any bread on the shelf. You see how that model is a perfect description of what inflation is. It's too much money for too few goods. At the end of the night, there's only 100 loaves of bread up there, and that means everybody's going to get fewer loaves of bread when the night is over and you cash in your chips. So that's the kind of thing that I've tried to teach my children. I don't know if I had achieved that particular analogy at that time, but that was the way that I tried to teach about the basics of economics.
And you're still teaching. I mean, evidently, even years later, you're like, you need to read this article. You need to read this article, and you got them orange pilled. So, Gabe, from your perspective, do you remember? How do you remember being taught about money?
Well, I'll tell you, the way that we earned money for our curriculum for our books was we would go around the neighborhood selling boxes of donuts to people, and so the notion of the need for putting in time and energy to receive something in return, to earn something, and then in turn be able to take that and to translate that into something that you needed to obtain, that made itself very, very clear to me. That this was, I mean, there was a whole gang of us kids out there with a wagon full of donuts going around knocking on the door, explaining what was going on. Some of them thought we were interesting kids, because I'm sure that didn't happen to them all the time. The kids were coming to them to raise money to buy their school books. But that was a very valuable lesson that I learned, was that you've got to put something into it. There's got to be work that takes place for money to truly be earned. And so, and of course, we see that now in proof of work. That's what makes it worth something, is there's an investment of time and an investment of energy. Work takes place to achieve something of value. And so that, of course, was something that was very, very clear to me at that age. Was, again, experiential learning is something that is always so much more valuable than just receiving information and then regurgitating to prove that you know it. So having that opportunity to do that, being exposed to Austrian economics at a young age, I've read Whatever Happened to Penny Candy, the book that you referred to, Tali. I've read that book again and again and again. I still have a copy of it sitting. I have a couple of copies of it, actually. But it's having that exposure to it, having those conversations about what happens in an economy when too much money is put into the system. Watching the fall of USSR take place back in 89 or 90, and having those conversations with my dad about, okay, well, what's going on out there? Well, how come nobody can afford to do things anymore? How come they their money isn't, what's going on? And having those conversations, and then being able to have things explained to me in a way that connect to real world experiences that are taking place in different places, and historical events that are occurring as they unfold. those are the things that stand out most to me, as far as my own education when it comes to that. Something that, I mean, of course, like I said, the Austrian economics, that penny candy book is something that each of my kids have read. And it's not something that it's written in a way, and I'm not trying to do a commercial for Mayberry, but it's written in a way that it's entertaining to read. It's not a big thick economics book that's going to bore you to death. Um, it's fun, and I'll still go back and I'll review it and say, okay, yeah, I get that. This is neat, and I can understand how to explain things to my own kids in a way that's clearer and more effective. And of course, now, I mean, we have the advantage of having so much rich content out there as it pertains to Bitcoin. It always goes back to what is most economically sensible and just the true nature and reality of actual money. I believe that we actually haven't seen real money until now, until Bitcoin has come into existence or been discovered, however you want to look at that. But you probably have already come to the conclusion that there's usually something playing in my house that has something to do with Bitcoin, whether it's a YouTube episode or a podcast or something like that. And yeah, I only have one left at home now, but she can tell you who all of the influencers are. She can tell you what the basics of the fundamentals of Bitcoin and economics are. And the coolest thing when I notice, and again, this is one of those things where kids are always watching you. They're always watching you. They learn from what's caught more than what's taught sometimes. And I mean, it's as soon as the fire was lit with me, it was like, okay, boom, Bitcoin all the time, and she gets it, and she is constantly, she sees me looking into it, and so of course she's like, okay, why is Dad so interested in this thing? What's going on with that? And a few months after I started really digging into it, and she was hearing things that are always going on in the house in the background. We were riding in the car one day. We were on our way home from practice, actually, and she asked me the question. She said, "Dad, what gives money its value?"
Whoa.
Here we go. It's on. And then from there, it's like, okay, let's go. And so I introduced to her the different concepts, as she comprehends them. And, like I said before, she's pretty dang smart. And so she now has a very solid understanding of the fundamentals of Bitcoin and, of course, money. And so that's been my approach with this. And now, I mean, obviously she's going to be a part of the family mission, and she's on this journey with us. And it's an exciting time because, again, and I think that I have the distinct privilege of being in a place where I'm in a place where I get to enjoy the benefits of being on this mission with my dad, and now also with my own child. And so I get to experience that from both of those perspectives, which is just it's an amazing thing. I can't tell you how awesome it is to be a part of it, to have three generations that are all engaged in this. And it's an awesome thing.
Yeah.
And so
awesome.
yeah, and it's and I'm thank God for Bitcoin is what I got to say.
Well, good for you. I propose
Let me
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jim. You got.
connect a couple of dots here that just exploded in my mind. Um, when I was a youngster, I was not given an allowance. That wasn't allowed in my home. If I wanted a new shirt, I had to go and do something to earn some money to buy a new shirt. If I wanted to go to the movies, I had to go earn the money to go to the movies. That was ingrained in me as the youngest child. I really remember that. When we opened our home school, we had to have curriculum materials. That's why we sent those kids out into the neighborhood with boxes of Krispy Kreme donuts. Scott, that's the real answer to the question you asked me a minute ago. How do you teach money? You got to have them out there making something. That's the way you teach money.
Mm-hmm.
That experience for those kids was invaluable. It seems like such a simple thing. Take these donuts and knock on the door. And we did that on Saturday morning. The reason we did it on Saturday is our school ran from Tuesday through Saturday. That meant that we had Saturday when the husbands, typically when we didn't have to go to work on Saturdays. So we had lots of teachers available on Saturdays. And every Saturday morning, that's the way we operated our school. Take the donuts, go knock on some doors. And then we used them. That just became training. It became ingrained in all of our family members. Mm-hmm. I have some of the hardest working kids you've ever met. I mean, they understand just from, not because I decided we have to teach our kids this subject. It was the way life works. Mm-hmm. That's how I ended up doing it.
Amen.
Teach them that in your homeschool. Use homeschool to do that.
Any chance you're going to put this into an article, Jim? I would love to see an article. I know you probably have a long list of things you want to write about, but on your long list, I think other people might want to hear, how do you teach about money kind of thing. I love it personally, but I'm definitely biased. But
I think parents today face a slightly different challenge in that I don't think any of us would feel comfortable sending them out into the neighborhood with a wagon full of donuts.
You bet.
And somebody will probably call the police because we don't have a permit, for selling donuts. So, when we were so our kids are just young adults right now. And when we were thinking about having them do something similar, I seriously didn't know what to tell them, except maybe they can babysit and maybe they can cut grass. But in terms of any kind of entrepreneurship kind of thing, today it's a lot harder for kids to try to do something. Like, for example, our youngest, when he was 16, boy, he desperately wanted a job. He wanted to earn his own money. He wanted to save up for a car. He couldn't find a place that would be willing to even look at his application because he wasn't 17 yet, because of the legal mumbo jumbo, insurance, all that stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So what would you say to parents today who want to do that but find it difficult to figure out something for their kids to do that's not family and friends?
Challenge them to make money inside the home economic system. The lawn needs mowing. I'm going to pay 75 cents for it. Who wants to do it? Or you want to go to the movies, you want to go do this, you want to go do that, you want something, go earn the money to get it. Don't give an allowance. That's because they teach kids that money comes out of the sky. Well, allowance is nothing but what the government does. That they pass out money, they will use any excuse to give out money. That's what drives the inflation, and they have to have the inflation.
UBI.
Yeah.
And allowance is just at UBI, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I would do it inside the house, and I totally agree with you. Today's world is different. You can't send kids out on the street.
They can
but
do
you
internet
certainly
still.
have dishes that need to be done.
What do you think about the internet? I mean,
I would let the dishes stack up in the sink until you ran out of dishes. You can work an economy like that all within the family. Or send them to your next door.
I actually had a whole argument with Scott, one of our early.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, early in our marriage, we were talking about whether or not to give our kids allowance for things that they would do around the house. My argument against that is there's regular maintenance of the house that everybody should partake in and not be paid to do, because that's just part of being part of the family, right? You help maintain the house. Why should I pay you to do something that needs to be done because you contributed to it too? If we're telling them to sweep the floor, I shouldn't have to pay them to sweep the floor. They're just supposed to take turns sweeping the floor. If it's an extra project, like we're digging a hole in the yard and it's hard work, we would have to pay somebody else to go dig it. I'm like, okay, kids, if you want to earn such and such amount of money, go do this special project. So we actually had that argument.
I don't remember this argument.
You don't remember that?
Yeah. I don't remember this argument. But
anyway, because we wanted to teach our kids about money and budgeting and everything, but I was really insistent because growing up Chinese, like receiving an allowance was not even a thing. Like that wasn't even discussed in our family. You were just supposed to participate and help with family affairs. So anyway,
But
I wanted to throw that
I
out
think
there.
you and Jim are pretty close, though. If you tell Nolan go
Yeah.
dig this hole, I would have paid somebody else out to do this for me, and somebody, maybe you would have paid somebody else to mow the lawn, and you say that you assign a value to it. That makes sense to me. I don't know. I don't remember what I argued against you with before, but I think I'm in agreement with you guys right now.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
It's a perfect place and opportunity to teach division of labor.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. Hold a class on division of labor, and then use that as the working example for it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. I just saw that today, Jim, or it was last night. I don't know. I mean, just the family dynamics that different kids are willing to do different things. Some are comfortable with the cars, some are comfortable in the kitchen. Like you kind of name it. And when someone comes in that's not like our son came in and he said, "I'm hungry." Well, Tolly and I were busy, and Tolly said, "Well, go cook." Like, what are you waiting for? Like you're old enough to cook. And here's a kid who can, like, he can do all kinds of programming. He can do I mean, very smart. But like, you would have thought that she was challenging him to like build a nuclear device or something. And then his sister comes in, and for her, it's no big deal. Like she's very comfortable. She has a lot of confidence with it, and she just does it, and he's fine. But she needed his help because she wanted to change her own oil in her car. Right? She didn't have the same confidence there, but a different brother did. So they actually are showing the division of labor. I didn't call it that. they dad lecture mode would have been like, Dad, we don't need to hear it. But they're doing it. They're actually exhibiting the division of labor and specialization. It's kind of fun. So.
What do you think, Gabe?
I think that any opportunity you can find to create a learning moment, you should take advantage of it. And they're all over the place. They're everywhere. And again, it's like you said, Scott. I mean, you don't have to go into like dad lecture mode or anything like that. But ask a question about it. Ask a follow-up question, or look for opportunities to tie it into something at a later time. That's where like consistent involvement matters. Is you can find ways to create patterns within things, and then I mean, kids, they're smart. They're going to figure things out on their own. Mm-hmm. And pattern recognition is one of the first things that our minds do as soon as we're born. And so, creating opportunities to create to generate patterns, and then to have conversations that tie into that. I think we should find every opportunity that we can to just make that happen, and then let the learning occur. I mean, learning's happening all the time anyway. So let's just find ways to make it noticeable when the learning is happening, and then to build on that learning as we move forward.
Amen. All right, let's do like a round of final thoughts.
I am famous in my family amongst all my children. Don't ask Dad a question unless you expect a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
True.
I get made fun of all the time for that.
I feel better now.
Because times I ask a question. My wife, we watch basketball games. We love basketball. She complains about the high salaries these players get. They can't make a foul shot and make $1 million a year. Well, that's the perfect place where I ask the question, why do you think that is?
Oh no.
And then we get into a whole discussion about specialization.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I jumped in.
No,
you're good.
Keep going. Actually,
Yeah.
What I was going to propose is let's just go around, and if you guys have whatever final thoughts that we didn't ask about, didn't touch on, something you wanted to emphasize.
What do you got, Pop?
Well, I tell you, it's a pleasure to sit and talk about homeschooling. I'm very passionate about it, always have been. And, now I have all of my children. My first child went on Social Security just recently. So I don't have very many children that I have that kind of child-parent relationship with. Homeschooling is, if you marry up homeschooling and Bitcoin, you truly are going to fix the world. That is going to happen. If you can make those two things grow together, you're going to have an impact on not just your family or your friends or acquaintances. That's going to affect the world. Um, that's my final thought.
Well
That's a
said.
great
Thought
quote.
right
That's a
there.
really great quote.
Wow.
Love it.
Yeah, top that
thought
one,
I-
Gabe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought I had something to say, but yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here today. I mean, it's if there's something that I've learned myself from this entire experience is it's that the education and the learning that takes place with our kids, it never really ends. It's always going to be taking place, and I'm learning from my father right now on this call. And it's so much of that learning that takes place, of course, is it's by example. The generations, the younger ones, they're watching us. They're watching everything that we do. They're watching the conversations that we have. They're watching the way that we react to things that are taking place in the world. And it's something that we need to be aware of, especially now. We're in such an important time in our history with the direction that things are going with Bitcoin, with the direction that things are going with education, with the movement towards people taking charge of their own children's education, people taking charge of their own financial situation, of their own money. It's such an important time right now, and this is the moment where it's necessary for people to engage in this movement. It's necessary for people to engage in these things that are taking place to truly improve the world that's laying before us in the future. And it's about our kids, and that's what it's about. And for us to set the example is the most important thing that we can possibly do. So I want to thank both of you for what you're doing, because it's huge. It's so important for not only for you to have focused and to continue to focus on your own family the way that you do, but to share what you're doing with the rest of us, with the rest of the world, and to have the heart and the motivation to put yourselves out here and to do what you're doing. So thank you for that. Thank you for bringing us in today to talk with you. I truly appreciate it.
Well, it's
Yeah.
mutual.
Nice.
We've had a wonderful time, not only today, but getting to know you up to this point, and looking forward to working together on Operation Bitcoin, on homeschooling, on Bitcoin in general. Tali, did you have any other final thoughts to? It's kind of hard to top these two
Yeah,
guys, but
I'm just going to echo what both of you said. For all the parents out there that are looking at homeschooling and maybe feeling intimidated by it, it's like what you both said, it's your character displayed during this process that's more important than anything else. It goes above and beyond teaching them how to become a superb reader or really great mathematician. Like, none of that matters more than the character you display during this journey, and what they can learn from that, because everything else they can learn even on their own down the road,
wow. I'm not even going to try to top any of you. I'm just going to say that we touched on a lot of great topics, and I hope that parents or aspiring parents listen to this and find something useful, and then whether for themselves, maybe they know a veteran, maybe they know somebody else who's a Bitcoiner, and they can share it, because there's a lot. We touched on so many different subjects, it's hard to wrap them all. So you guys hang on the line. We're going to stop the recording, and we'll catch everybody else next week.
If you enjoyed this podcast and if you found this valuable, please leave a review to help others find us too.
For those who prefer zapping sats, we love those too. We're on Fountain, we're on Noster, and we're on Orange Pill app.
Also, I host a women's only Bitcoin podcast called Orange Hatter. And the mission of that podcast is to reach pre-coiner women. So if you know of someone in your life that you would like to introduce Bitcoin to, check it out.
So Tali and I also don't have sponsors for this show. We are trying to build and run Free Market Kids. You can check out our products at freemarketkids.com. This includes the Bitcoin mining game HODL Up, which is a great introduction to Bitcoin.
The school edition of Huddle Up is always available. We also have the 2024 Halving Edition. It's going to be super deluxe. Very excited to roll it out. It is available on pre-sale at a 21% discount.
Until next time, happy hodling.